One of the things that you might want to think about when choosing your VCE subjects is scaling. This presentation is to tell you what scaling is and how it works, and most importantly, why you should not consider scaling when you are choosing your VCE subjects. So, when you watched the video about the VCE, we talked about study scores. The study scores we talked about there are called raw scores, and that basically tells you how well you did in that subject compared to everyone else who did that subject. What VCAR will do when they're working out your ATAR, the number that's going to get you into university, is they will scale your score. And that's basically a way of comparing how well you did to everyone else in the state in all subjects. So it's basically a way of accounting for the difficulty of the subjects. If you're looking at the VICTA, and so you're looking at the prerequisites for university, that's always going to be a raw score. But when we're calculating ATARs, we always use scaled scores. So they both have their uses and both are important to understand. So, what is scaling? First of all, when you calculate a VCE study score, the middle student of every study is going to have a 30, and it's always going to have a standard deviation of 7. That doesn't account for how strong the other people were. So it doesn't account for basically the level of competition. If, when they look at the scores, VCAR judge that the competition in a study was higher, basically that the people who were doing it were of a higher ability, then the study score is scaled upwards. If they judge that the competition was easier, so essentially you could get a higher study score more easily to start with, then it's scaled down. Okay? It is not looking at how difficult a study is. They don't look at the exam and go, how hard are these questions? They basically look at how well the students who did that subject did in all their other studies. And if they did really well in their other studies, then they go, that was a very competitive subject, we'll need to scale it up. If they didn't do as well in their other subjects, then it'll get scaled down. Okay? But what does it really mean? Okay? It essentially means that if you take a subject that's really competitive, so therefore it was really, really hard to get a high study score, then your mark's going to go up. If you take a subject that was not so competitive, but therefore it was relatively easy to get a high study score to start with, then your mark's going to be scaled down. Okay? So essentially it evens out those inequities, but it's not bonus points. Your mark will only go up if you had a hard time getting a high score to begin with, and your mark will only go down if you had an easy time getting a high score to begin with, comparatively. Okay, so all it does is even out the differences between the cohorts taking the different subjects. It's definitely not bonus points. So it's not like they're going, we like the fact that you did specialist maths, have some extra points. It's just comparing those different studies' difficulty in terms of their competitiveness. Okay. Now, having said that, scaling in maths is a little bit different. Scaling in maths is ever so slightly artificial. They do look mostly at how students did in their other studies, but they do also make sure that because it's a deliberately tiered subject, specialist maths is always scaled up by a bit more than methods, and that's always scaled up by a bit more than further. Okay? Now, so if we look at further maths, it goes down slightly. This is our median. Okay? And you'll notice that the further away you get from 30, the less effect the scaling has. Okay? So a 30 might go down to a 22, but a 45 would only go down to a 44, and a 50 stays the same. Methods get scaled up and get scaled up more, so it increases, and specialist maths goes up even higher. And you might go, yay, great, I get a 30 in spec, I'm going to turn that into a 42. What you've got to bear in mind is that only the best mathematicians in the state are taking specialist maths. So being an average student amongst the top mathematicians in the state is not an easy mark to get. Yeah, getting a 30 in spec is really, really hard, because you're comparing yourself to a whole load of students who are absolutely outstanding at maths. Scaling and LOTE is also a little bit different. Scaling and LOTE, the government's trying to encourage people to take languages. So there we do get 5 added to the subject score mean. So if you get a study score of 50, they'll scale it normally, and then the study scores of 30 will get an extra 5. As with all, the further away you get from 30 in both directions, the less effect the scaling has. So you don't always get 5 added. Depends, you get 5 added if you're at 30. By the time you get to 40, it might be 1 or 2. Okay? However, it should still only be the case that you would study a LOTE if it's something you're good at and you enjoy. Okay? Because choosing subjects based on scaling doesn't work. It is not the case that taking subjects that are scaled up will get you a high ATAR. What gets you a high ATAR is choosing things which are based on your strengths and your interest. Okay? Because if you choose something based just on the fact it's scaled up, the chances are that you'd get a low study score to start with. Your raw score would be low. And yes, it'll be scaled up. But if you chose something that you're interested in, you get a higher study score to start with, which even if it's scaled down is likely to be higher than your scaled up score for a subject that you weren't interested in and didn't play to your strengths. Okay, so we look at a student who chooses basically all subjects that are scaled up. But by choosing all subjects that are scaled up, they've actually shot themselves in the foot a bit because they've chosen things they're not very good at. Okay, and this is a real example, by the way. Real example. Okay, so yes, all the scores went up, some of them by quite a lot. French went up by quite a lot, but despite that, because they were low to start with, the ATAR was still low. Okay. On the other hand, if you have a student who chose subjects that were scaled down, so the student chose these subjects and got good study scores. These are not outstanding study scores, but these are good, solid study scores in those ones. Yes, they go down, but we can see that that student's ATAR is still significantly higher. Okay? Because they've chosen things that they're good at, they've chosen things that they're interested in. Yeah? And that's resulted in them getting decent study scores to start with. Okay? So the message always is, choose what you're good at, choose what you're interested in. Don't worry about scaling. If anyone starts telling you, oh, this subject is scaled up, you say, well, that's nice. But that's all it is. It's a nice bit of information, but it doesn't affect your subject choices.